When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be talking about Ramsay Bolton in both the show and the book, and which one is better. Now, the character from the show and the book are very different in terms of their role, in terms of both the book and the show. In the book, Ramsay is, in my opinion, he's not the main villain of any of the books. He's kind of more of a side villain. The most he ever gets to becoming a main villain would really be Dance with Dragons. But in a lot of ways in the book, Ramsay Bolton also takes up a lot of being the main villain for that book as well. So in the book, the one thing we're going to talk about as we go through the plot with the book character is Ramsay is never really in the spotlight. Whereas in the show, Ramsay becomes the main villain for multiple seasons of the television show. So I want to go through both, look at the differences, what each character was used for, and which one I think was better. So getting into first the show, and then we'll talk about the book. In the show, very differently than the book, we don't see the character of Ramsay really until season 3. And Ramsay's very much introduced differently than he is in the book. In the book, we hear about the character of Ramsay a little bit off of the page, and I'll talk about that when we get to the book. But in the show, there's no real build up to the character. He kind of just pops up. And we see Theon get captured, he's being tortured, and Ramsay comes off as this person that is here to help Theon. All the while, he's just psychologically kind of abusing Theon and more or less trying to get on his good side to get information out of him. The reveal we get in the actual show, where Bran and Rickon are still alive, comes because Ramsay befriends Theon, and as they're making their whole loop back to go to the Dreadfort, it's then revealed. So Ramsay in the show, in my opinion, is shown to be very clever, he's shown to be very cunning, and then we see as the torture gets worse. Theon finally thought he'd escaped from this horrible torture he'd been going through. He got very vulnerable talking about his mistakes and thinking about how Ned was his real father and he's betrayed everything that he's grown to know with the Starks. And so that's really great. Just for it to have Ramsay be the actual person in charge and the person that's going to torture Theon for the rest of season 3. That's really what season 3 is. It's everything we don't see in the book. In the book, we don't see any of Theon's torture, which works really well in the book, but in the show, we basically spend a whole season trying to uncover who this Ramsay character is, why he's torturing Theon so much, and the sadistic things that he does to Theon. Also, I did want to say, if my voice sounds a little weird, my sinuses are not feeling the best this morning, so if that bothers you, I'm sorry. But let's continue on. So getting into season 4 is where Ramsay really starts to come into his own. One thing I'll really say about the show is the show did a really good job of whenever a main villain was going to die, that they started to ramp up the next main villain. Because in the show, it's a lot easier to just say, this was your main villain for a couple seasons, and then you move on. In the book, it's not like that. In the book, it's you have a number of antagonists that relate to a plot line. So, for instance, Ramsay Bolton, Walder Frey, Ramsay, people in Karth for like Daenerys in a book, or Miri, or the Slavers, whoever. In the show, it really comes down to there are like major villains of each season, or it's usually a couple seasons. So for season 4, it's the ending of both Joffrey and Tywin, who were the main antagonists really for the first 4 seasons of the show. Now you might be saying, well, Tywin doesn't die till the end of the season, so it's more Ramsay is ascending to taking that spot. Season 4 is really where we start to see a little bit of the stuff we get in A Dance with Dragons, with the opening stuff of Theon starting to be used by Ramsay, taking Moat Cailin, all that kind of stuff. And so Ramsay comes off as, in the show, much more competent than he does in the book, at least in terms of consistently. Now, there are hiccups. Now, let's get that right off the bat. There are decisions that Ramsay makes in the show that are just mind-boggling, or that it's just poorly written in the show. So, for instance, one of the moments that comes to mind when I look at Ramsay as a character is the first one being the one everybody points to. During the episode where Tyrion has his trial, I believe it's episode 6 of season 4, we see the whole Asha, and yes, her name is Asha, it's not Yara, it's a stupid name, we call her Asha, show or book. Asha tries to break Theon out. We see that Ramsay's torture of him has destroyed him so much that he's not even willing to go with his sister to escape. But the dumb part is not that. The dumb part is that Ramsay allows Asha to leave, which makes no sense. At this point, remember in the show, There is no Euron character. We didn't know that Euron even existed in the show. Victarion is not a character. Aeron is not really a character in the show. I don't even think he's actually ever named Aeron in the show. I know that there are characters we use as like thumbnail pictures for Aeron, but I don't think there actually is one in the show. So in terms of like the claimants for the Greyjoys, you would have both of them. And so that's a bit of an oversight. I think it's really dumb. There's just a number of reasons I could never see Ramsay doing that, because you could then also be more sadistic and just torture Asha as well as Theon. But he lets her go for some reason, one of the most baffling decisions of the first 4 seasons of television. But one thing that's quite clear about Ramsay in the show versus the book is, in the show, Ramsay has less moments where I look at him and go, huh, that was really clever, but that was also really dumb at the same point. Like when we get to the book character of Ramsay, the thing I'm going to point to the most with Ramsay is that he's a character that can be very clever. He can be very street smart. He can be very good at deceiving people on a personal level. But in terms of the big picture, Ramsay thinks very small. And so I'll talk about that when we get to the book. So let's finish off here what we got to talk about with Ramsay. So as the season goes on, Ramsay becomes like the heir to Roose. He gets named to Bolton. He gets legitimized, all that kind of stuff. And we head into season 5. And season 5, for the most part, takes on like the second half, I guess I would say, of A Dance with Dragons. More or less. It goes a little bit further because you also have, by the end of season 5, the resolution to the Stannis plot, which is going to be in Winds of Winter. So Ramsay at this point, it's pretty much the same outside of the single fact that Jane Poole is not in the show, and that is actually Sansa who marries Ramsay. So if you've never read the books or you haven't read them in a long time, the whole idea that the Boltons are using is they're going to marry a fake Arya to Ramsay to give the Boltons more, claim, legitimacy. The same idea of why Sansa is married to Tyrion, for instance. So for that point of it, Ramsay in the show is really cruel to Sansa, but he's also in the show able to play like the gallant, like man that's going to marry Sansa, kind of the same idea of Joffrey. And don't get me wrong, that storyline is so damaging to the character of Sansa, but for Ramsay, it fits his character perfectly. Him putting on a show, and then on the flip of a dime, he's now this horrible person that's abusing Sansa, that's doing all this stuff, this cruel stuff. And then the other questionable stuff of season 5 for Ramsay as a character is the whole idea that he has a couple men and he's able to raid all of Stannis' camp and do all that stuff, which is stupid. I will say also in the show versus the book, Ramsay is shown to be much more of like a competent military general, and you really see that in season 6. He's shown to be a lot more competent, and that's the one thing that the show does that the book does not, is Ramsay is much more confident. Like, yes, he does have oversights, he doesn't take Stannis seriously, but in the show, to be honest, should they have taken Stannis seriously, given how he ends? Not really. Ramsay is really the person that beats Stannis, not Roose. Roose doesn't have much to do with it at all. And that's another part of it, is like, when you talk about Ramsay in the show, it comes at the expense of Roose Bolton. And Roose Bolton in the show is never as good as he is in the book, because, for instance, Roose Bolton is cut out of season 1. I'm pretty sure he's not introduced until season 2 when Robb begins his campaign in the West and he meets Talissa. That's when I think we see Roose for the first time, if I'm not mistaken. Roose is very much a limited character in the show. He's not nearly as much of a presence as he is in the book, and a lot of that goes to Ramsay. Ramsay gets a lot of the antagonizing qualities, and he gets a lot more screen time than he does in the book. So Ramsay then going into season 6, Sansa and Theon have escaped, similar to what we see in the book, just with Jane Poole. And it's a big oversight by Ramsay because of the way he treats people. Eventually they turn on him, and that starts his downfall. So season 6 is all about just basically completely the Battle of the Bastards. Ramsay also is shown to be competent with making allies. He has both the Umbers and the Karstarks behind him. If we were going off of the book, that's a good majority of the northern forces. Now, there's a lot of forces that are never mentioned in really the show at all, like, for instance, the Manderleys or the Dustins, the Risewells. Like, they're not really factions in the show. But either way, Ramsay is shown to be competent with gaining allies. And the real big part of season 6 that I think is really different than the book is when you get to the end of season 6 and you see that Ramsay actually is able to defeat Jon pretty easily in battle. If it wasn't for the Knights of the Vale, Ramsay would have won the battle. Now, not maybe easily. He still took a lot of losses just based on his military strategy, having archers shoot into his own men, and just even the kind of way he went into battle. But the way Ramsay deals with Jon Snow and the forces that Jon has is incredibly smart. Getting rid of Rickon and baiting Jon in to then kill Jon. Ramsay is extremely intelligent, especially in the show compared to what he is in the book. And so that's something I really want to point out. So then Ramsay, we know he dies. Obviously, he had to die at some point. But the one thing that I think sticks out to me with Ramsay in the show is he's incredibly competent compared to his book counterpart. Does Ramsay still make mistakes? Of course. But he's shown to be extremely cruel like he is in the book, but there isn't that level of incompetency that you see happen in the book. So let's then transition to the book to show you kind of some of those differences. So Ramsay is a character that we start to learn about in the early sections of Book 2 in A Clash of Kings, where we hear through Bran's POVs that Ramsay is doing some really awful things. He's starting to gather men, and he's creeping near Lady Hornwood's lands. Lady Hornwood actually comes to Winterfell, and she's worried about her lands. And we actually see that she was right to do so, because then Ramsay marries Lady Hornwood to take her lands, and he forces her against her will. It's so bad that Lady Hornwood starts eating like her own fingers. It is absolutely horrible. And Ramsay, like in the show, comes off as this horrifying, horrible person, but he also comes off as very short-sighted. Like on one side of it, yes, Ramsay is gaining more, power for the Boltons, but you also got to remember, at the time that Ramsay does that, and when he takes Lady Hornwood, is the same point where Robb Stark is destroying the Lannisters right now. He's about to go into the West. He hasn't had a loss of a battle yet. They still have Jaime Lannister. He still has his marriage to the Freys. Everything's going right for Robb. And so if Robb was to even come to peace with the Lannisters or bend the knee and not die, Ramsay is going to be executed. And as we see, Ramsay, which ends up turning out to be Reek, is executed. Ramsay barely survives his forced marriage of Lady Hornwood. So Reek, aka Ramsay, is then captured at Winterfell, and he stays there for a while. Jojen even has a vision/dream, I should say, of him killing or being involved in killing Bran and Rickon. We know that doesn't happen. This ends up being two boys that are shown to be Rickon and Bran, but aren't actually. And so Ramsay is kind of pulling the strings of Theon. He's kind of getting things to be orchestrated in a way that he can manipulate. But either way, again, this is what I'm talking about. Ramsay is good when it comes to manipulating people personally, or it comes to, self-preservation. He can be good at those things. But he thinks very much small scale, because even at this point, when he's now backing Theon, he still very easily could have stood to lose a lot. But Ramsay then goes to get some Dreadfort men. He comes back. He deals with the forces at Winterfell that are sieging Theon. He takes Theon hostage, and they sack Winterfell. This is another move that can be very blindsided, in my opinion, because him burning Winterfell is something that's going to get out. That's something I think is going to come all the way full circle and will be a big part as to why House Bolton comes down. I think a lot of the reason why House Bolton is going to lose is because of the actions that both Ramsay and Roose have taken that were incredibly short-sighted. Burning Winterfell, in my opinion, sacking it, was a major mistake. So that's part of it, right? Is that Ramsay, again, is somebody that is able to survive. He's clever, but he's also very short-sighted. He doesn't think about the big picture and how to hold the North as a whole. A lot of the things that Ramsay does in the book versus the show is that he does things that make him happy. He does things that further what he wants to do. Cruelty, putting fear into people. He doesn't understand how to actually rule people, and that's something that comes up really as we get into Dance. So the big difference between the show and the book at this point is this is where Ramsay's story ends for a couple books. We don't see Ramsay until book 5. So book 3, we don't see Ramsay really much at all. We just know that Ramsay went back to the Dreadfort taking hostages, and we hear loosely some stuff through Roose, kind of like right before the Red Wedding. And then we don't see him in Feast for Crows, obviously, because there's really only one chapter even in the North, which is Sam's first chapter. We don't hear about Ramsay. So then we get into book 5, and the whole main premise of book 5 is Roose needs to get his forces north. The Ironborn still control Moat Cailin. We have fake Arya coming north to marry Ramsay, and so you see a lot of the same kind of ideas play out that we see in the show, but the big difference is it's much clearer that in the book, Roose Bolton is in charge. He's the main antagonist. Yes, we might hate Ramsay much more than we do Roose, because he's just such an asshole, really. But Roose is the person everyone fears. He's the one keeping everything in line. And Ramsay does almost everything he can to undo that. For instance, one of Roose's biggest supporters, at this point, biggest supporters, is Lady Barbary Dustin. And she hates Ramsay. And so that could be a big factor that turns Barbary Dustin against him. We even know things like what Ramsay's done in the past, killing Domeric Bolton. That was something that Ramsay could do to try and get himself to be the next heir for Roose. So again, it's clever, but it's kind of short-sighted because it made Ramsay have enemies, and he isn't as clever as he thinks he is in terms of covering it up. Same idea of what we're going to see with when things like the sack of Winterfell start to get brought up. Somebody like Wex survived. He knows what happened there. So that's the whole point of it. And so as you get further in, you see Ramsay is not really taking the Stannis threat seriously. I think it's something that's going to lead to some Bolton defeats and the downfall of their house. And that's kind of where I want to end with these comparisons, is when you look at both, Ramsay is never the main antagonist of the story. He's an antagonist, of course, for the Northern plotline. He's somebody we despise and hate. He gets us to like Theon, which is crazy to think about. And so Ramsay comes off as somebody that, on one hand, can be incredibly clever. He can make some good decisions, but a lot of the times he's making things that are going to lead to the downfall of House Bolton. In the show, he's somebody that comes off as a lot more competent. He does things for reasons. I didn't even talk about him killing Roose Bolton in the show, but like that made sense because Ramsay is somebody that's trying to gain power. He could get away with it. Now, I think it's really badly written in the show, but still, that's the way the show just tried to show Ramsay as a character. Ramsay comes off as incredibly more competent than the character in the book does. And I think that I like the book character more just because he feels more human, like somebody with those characteristics that are incredibly sadistic, cruel, all those things. They wouldn't necessarily think about long-term consequences of the actions they're doing, whereas Ramsay in the show feels a little too competent, in my opinion. Like, he feels a bit too good at the job he's doing, and that makes him a good villain. Don't get me wrong, I think Ramsay is great in the show and in the book, but I do think I prefer the character of the book because, like I feel like I talk about every time I look at the book versus the show, is that there's a lot more nuance to the character of Ramsay, and that's not necessarily there as much as it is in the show. So let me know what you guys think about the character of Ramsay Bolton / Snow, and I'll see you guys all next one. Bye, guys.